Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Nun, and we're starting on the very bottom line of Mem Testament Beis. Yesterday we made reference to a guarantor and his responsibilities towards the one for whom he is providing a guarantee. Today we're going to be speaking about an arev and a kablan. An arev is your typical guarantor, and a kablan is a higher level, typically referred to in halachic terms as a contractor of some kind. And we're going to be analyzing these different levels. Again, the arev is a more basic level, the kablan is a higher level. And the Gemara says on the bottom line of Mem Testament Beis Itmar, the Amoraim explain as follows. Arev diksuba divrei hakol lo nishtabed. That when it comes to an arev, a regular guarantor, on behalf of his son's ksuba, the halacha is that he's really not nishtabed. It's not actually a proper shibud where he'd have to pay out some money. Rashi at the bottom of Mem Testament Beis explains, Chada da arev be'almahu, he's just a regular guarantor. And this type of contract with a wife is very unique because typically when there's a guarantor, it's because person A gave to B, and B is now obligated to give back to A. And if there's defaulting, we need a guarantor. But when a woman enters into a marriage, it says the Gemara, Lab midi chasra shelo hotziya klum mishala. When she got married, she didn't necessarily invest anything in order to bring about the result of a ksuba. So therefore, the mixture of things, because he's a guarantor ba'alma, he's an arev ba'alma, and because she really didn't bring any money to the marriage necessarily, she might have, but it's lab dafka. So therefore, the halacha is that by an arev divrei hakol that he is not mishtabed. But a kablan, when it comes to a person who's a contractor, top line of Nun Amud Aleph, de bal chov, not in a case of ksuba, but in a case where there's a chov, divrei hakol mishtabed. There, everyone agrees that the guarantor would be held reliable if the person for whom he's creating a guarantee defaults. But there are two cases which are the cases of machlokes. Arev de bal chov, if you have the lower level guarantor and the case is one of a loan, or the kablan de ksuba, or the higher level guarantor, but in a lower level case, which is that of the ksuba, that's pligi. That's where we have our machlokes. Ika lamanda amar, that in both of those cases, afal gav de les le nichse lelove mishtabed, that even if the person lending money or the husband doesn't have anything to support his guarantee, still the guarantor, be it a kablan or an arev, would be mishtabed. And ve'ika lamanda amar, that it depends, that isle mishtabed, that if the initial person making the transaction has the appropriate properties, then mishtabed, the guarantor, would be obligated to pay. Nilese lo mishtabed, and if there wasn't any money at the time of the transaction, then the guarantor would not be mishtabed. V'hilchasa halacha l'maisa, how do we paskin? And this is actually quoted in Shulchan Aruch, in Tor Shulchan Aruch and Choshen Mishpat. V'hilchasa bekulhu afal gav de lesle mishtabed. That when there is a case of a bal chov, even if it were to be the case that when I, who was supposed to pay the money, when I lent you money, that I lent you money and you didn't have any properties to back up your loan, but if I'm a guarantor of any kind, then mishtabed, I will be held accountable. However, bar me arev de ksuba, with that one exception. Arev de ksuba is never going to be a debate because the afal gav de isle lo mishtabed. Even if the husband were to have had properties to back up and support the Masayim Zuz of the Ksuba, lo mishtabed my taima, because mitzvahu de avad the lo midi chasra. It's a mitzvah to get married. That's a debate in the Rishonim. If it's a mitzvah minei ubei to get married, or if the mitzvah of marriage is a hechi timtza to the mitzvah of prurvu, that is a discussion in the Rishonim. And velo midi chasra, that she didn't lay out money to get married. Look, it's possible that a woman could bring a dowry, could bring nichse malug into a marriage or nichse tzon barzel, but it's not a chiyu for her to do so. The fact is that when a husband says harad mekudeshesli, they're fully married with kiddushin and nisun, then she earns a ksuba if the marriage doesn't work out. But since she didn't really invest any money, so therefore the Gemara says that an arev will never have to actually pay, even if he is a guarantor for a ksuba. And then the Gemara goes back to what we discussed at the end of the day yesterday. Yesterday, we spoke about the fact that when a person collects from Yisomim, when it has to do with the Ksubas Isha, that it's Beziboris, that she has to collect from the Yisomim's field because of Ziboris. And the Gemara says, Amar Ravina, hold on one second, I'm not understanding. Toshma, we're 10 lines down on Nun Amud Aleph. Me'ikara de taknisan, the the tiknosin yoser mimasha ish rotza lisa isha rotza linaseh. When we said that when a woman collects her ksuba from her dead husband's children, from the Yisomim that it's busy Boris, we argued that it was because a woman has a lower threshold because she's always ready to get married. She never wants to be alone. Tavu l'meitav tandu. And says the Gemara, V'sal kadaitach miyasme. But if you want to say that it's because of the Yisomim, then who cares about your svara about the Isha? Hai mishum di yasmehu. Well, your svara is irrelevant. They're Yisomim. No matter what happens, when you collect from the Yisomim, the halacha is you're going to be collecting from Ziboris. So says the Gemara, Tiyufta de Marzutra, Tiyufta. This rejects the Shita of Marzutra. What was the Shita of Marzutra? So if you want to see his Shita can be found at the 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down on Mem Testament base. We'll read it so that there's clarity. And he says at the 2 dots there, Amar Marzutra Breder of Nachman lo Amar Nelami Yasme, that a woman can collect her ksuba from Ziboris only as it relates to Yisomim, Aval Minei Didei, but when she collects from her husband, then it's Bebenunis. And we just rejected the Shita of Marzutra Breder of Nachman, because he distinguishes between an Isha collecting from her Yisomim, which is busy Boris, and from her husband, which is Bebenunis. And here in our Gemara, it seems to be that this has nothing to do with that at all. It's not because of the Isha. His reasoning is rejected. And the Gemara continues, I have a 2 dots here. Does everyone have a 2 dots here? 12 lines down? Okay. So the Gemara says, Amar Marzutra Breder Rav Nachman, same person again, but he says, Mishmei de Rav Nachman. It's a little bit interesting. This language of the Gemara is a little odd. Who else would he be talking in the name of? It's Marzutra. Oh, it's his son. Marzutra Bereder of Nachman. So he says in the name of his father. That actually does make sense. Shtarchov. Let's say that I have a shtarchov. Hayotze al hayisomim. That is meant to be collected from Yisomim. So I'm going to the Yisomim of family X. The father just died. And I have a shtar that the father who died owes me money. And in the shtarchov, it says that I should be paid in idis. So even though the document of mine, which says that when I collect from family X, the family whose father just died, if I'm supposed to be collecting from that family, the document says that under all circumstances you collect from idis. That's a stira. Eino gov eliminazi boris. This is a unique case scenario. Let's review the case. What do we typically say when a person collects from Yisomim? What kind of fields do they collect? Ziboris. What happens if the document that I have to collect from that family says you'll always collect idis, even if they are Yisomim? So now you have a conflict. The general rule is that when you collect from Yisomim is Ziboris, but this shtar that I have says that I'm supposed to collect from idis. So the Gemara says the 1/3 of the way down, Amar Abaye Teda de Balchov Dine Bebenunis. Really, in general, when it comes to a Baal Din, to a regular person who's collecting a chov, we should be collecting from the fields that are the B quality fields, the Benunis. Umiyasme Biziboris. And when it comes to the Yisomim, it should be Biziboris, but he does not collect idis. Amar Le Rava, he says to Abaye, I don't understand what you're talking about, Abaye. Hachi Hashta, what is going on? First of all, Balchov Dine Mideo Raisa Biziboris. Really, you're wrong. Abaye, you wanted to say that the typical din of a Baal Chov is that he collects bebenunis. That's not true. Mida Oraisa, he collects biziboris kide Ula. What did Ula say? To Amar Ula, Davar Torah, Baal Chov biziboris. That a Baal Chov always, at a minimum, collects from ziboris. He has no reason to collect any higher. Shenemar bachutz ta'amod v'ha'ish, madarko shel ish lahotzi pachos shebekelim. It is whatever the pasuk means over here, but this pasuk is speaking about a loan. And when we talk about a man, the man typically will try and pay out from the worst quality kalim. So therefore, we see that Mida Oraisa, Rava points out that a Baal Chov is supposed to collect from Ziboris, not from Benunis, like Abaye said. And when it comes to a Baal Chov, it's not a din de Oraisa Abaye. It's only so that people don't collect. Only so that people don't feel restricted from lending money, because if I lend money, I don't want to get back garbage properties. So then the Gemara says, V'gabe Yasme, and in regards to Yisomim, which we had said that they collect from Zibur, so that's Pashat that's the case. But your fundamental presentation, Abaye, is not correct. Elahacha, in our case, of the document that I'm collecting from Yisomim, but the document says that I'm supposed to be collecting from Idis. Elahacha, in our case, Kevan dedine mideoraisa beidis, afilu miyasmena beidis. So what does Rava want to say to Abaye? You're absolutely wrong on a couple of fronts. But to our specific case, the reason why you're wrong is because once a document specifically specifies that I'm allowed to collect from Idis, even though the person I'm collecting from is Yisomim and they typically collect from Ziboris, doesn't matter. The din d'oraisa is that you collect be'idis, which is a big chiddush. And that too is against the shita of Mar Zutra Brei de Rab Nachman. So then it says the Gemara, does Rava really hold that way? Does Rava really hold, and let's review the case, I have a shtar. The shtar says that when you collect from my family, you should collect from my Idis fields, from my A+ fields, even though the document itself says you should collect from Idis. Mar Zutra Brei de Rab Nachman says, in the name of Rab Nachman, that really you should only be collecting from, that you should even be collecting from Idis. So says the Gemara, Rava, does that actually apply? After all, Hatani, we have a brisa in the name of Avram Choza, a very uncommon name in Shas. I don't know that maybe we've seen it before. Any recollections, David? Anything?
Zero.
No.
In fact,
his name does Avram.
This is actually different. It's Avram, which is maybe a stranger.
My brother, Alav Shalom, was Avram. And then the base medrash in the Yeshiva, they had a big machlokas about his name. Avram. So they debated if his name was a real name, but it's not. In yesteryear, in the last generation, it wasn't so uncommon. I don't mean my brother's.
If that was pronunciation or.
No, you even see on headstones. Was
Avram without a hey.
Yeah. It's definitely not something we promote. In fact, when my brother got sick, we added a hey to his name. It added, I guess, weeks to his life. I don't know how to measure, but weeks, not years. But so the name Avram is uncommon. So V'hatani Avram Choza Eini From Nichse Samim Eliminazi Boris Ve'afilu Heini Zaken. Even if it was to be the case that there was a specific exclusion, that we're dealing with the case of Nizaken, and even though it's true that in general, when we're talking about Yisomim, we typically collect from Ziboris, but even had it been a case of Nizaken, that's true. Nizaken, din and midoraisa be'idis. And what do we see? That really, typically, Nizaken should be from Idis. That was our mission at the beginning of the parak. Those are the first words of this parak. Nizaken shaman lehen be'idis, and that's a din d'oraisa. So we have this statement from Avram Chozad that says that even when you're collecting from Yisomim from the world of Nizaken, you still collect from Ziboris. So how can Rava be right? Rava, you're saying that Abaye is wrong. Abaye wanted to say it's taka true, that when the document says that you should collect from the Yisomim, even from Idis, we ignore the document and we go with the general rule that when you collect from Yisomim, you're supposed to collect Biziboris. Rava says even Idis. And we see this brisa. This brisa says that's not true in the name of Avram Choza. That's not correct. So says the Gemara to defend Rava, and we're 2/3 of the way down at the beginning of the line. And this will look familiar. What must this brisa be talking about, where we see that you are not collecting idis, even though you should be? Says the Gemara, idis that we're talking about a case where the idis of the person who got damaged was the same level of the lowest property of the ziboris of the mazik, and we're holding like Rabbi Shmuel in this case, and therefore he gets idis. And we've made tikkun olam takinu rabbanan b'demazik. That because of tikkun olam, we always wanted to make sure. This was Rabbi Shmuel's explanation of our Mishnah. That the tikkun olam din is that we want to make sure that that people get paid back by the mazik, so that the mazik is motivated not to be a mazik ever again. And they just kept the standard of the Yisomim on a din d'oraisa. So Rava is protected. That means that we have a machlokas right now between Rava and Abaye. What's the machlokas? Let's review the case a third or fourth time. I don't remember how many times now. We have a document and it says, Phil, you can collect from my family at any time. When you do, it should be be'idis. And I go over to the Yisomim. The Yisomim say, we're Yisomim, you have to collect biziboris. I hold up the shtar and I say, I'm really sorry. I know you guys are going through a lot, but the shtar says I'm allowed to collect through idis. Rava says incorrect. You have to follow the Yisomim. And I'm sorry, Abaye says incorrect, you have to follow the Yisomim. And Rava says not true, you get to collect even from idis. The brisa. So we solved the brisa by saying it was Rabbi Shmuel. And asks the Gemara again, Eini, 3/4 of the way down, is this really true? Ve'atani Rebbe Lazar nivsa'a. A lot of unique names tonight. Ein nifrain minichse yisomim ela min haziboris. Listen to this difficult language. You're not allowed to get paid out by the properties of yisomim unless it's ziboris. Ve'afilu hein idis. What does that mean? That doesn't make any sense. You can't collect from the properties of the yisomim that are ziboris even if they're idis. So says the Gemara, "My afidu hein idis, lava falgab dechsiv idis b'shtara." Isn't this the exact case that Rava was talking about? That even if idis was written in the shtar, afal pikein, you only get paid ziboris, and therefore Rava's shita is blown out of the water. Says the Gemara, lo. My idis, what are we talking about in a case of idis? Of shifai idis, of a case of idis that got ruined or that got taken away. So Rashi, 2/3 of the way down, says shifai idis le'achar hezek. So that's what the Gemara says, that the fields were damaged. Kidder Rava. Back in the Gemara, what does Rava say? Dama Rava. He's ziboris govamina idis. If there was damage and you were supposed to collect from ziboris, you're allowed to collect from the idis. Shvoi idis, if the idis got ruined or destroyed between the damage and the time of collection, gova min habeinanis, you can collect from the B class, from the middle category. And they stay the same, that when it comes to yisomim, you typically collect from ziboris. So the Gemara ends up concluding that there is still a machlokas, that Rava Shita withstands the multiple tests of the Gemara, and he holds that when the shtar says, Phil, you can go collect from my family whenever you want, even with idis, Rava says, Taka, that's true. You should do it nicely and sensitively. They're going through mourning, but you should be a mensch about it. And at the end of the day, Rava says you're allowed to collect from idis. However, Abaye says you're not allowed to collect from idis. We follow the general principle that's listed in the Mishnah at the beginning of the parak on Maseches Mid Beis, which is that when it comes to yisomim, we always pay ziboris. All right, let's dig into this din a little bit more. We're at the 2 dots, 10 lines from the bottom of Nun Amud Aleph. The Gemara says that, as we've discussed already 10 times today and 20 times yesterday, that when it comes to collecting payments that are owed from the family of the Yisomim, so the Gemara says, quoting our Mishnah, that when you collect, you have to be nice to them. You can only collect from their fields that are their sea level fields, the Ziboris field. So boy Rav Achdavoy Bar Ami, Yisomim She'amru, when the Chachamim instituted this rule, or I should say, when the Torah instituted this rule, what type of Yisomim are we talking about? Do we say under all circumstances of Yisomim, that when we collect from them, we're collecting from them as it relates to Ziboris because they're Ketanim and Gdolim? Is it Yisomim Shamru Ketanim or Afilu Gdolim? Is it only children, or is it even adults who are Yisomim? So to this, the Gemara says, the Chakira. What are the two sides, the two possibilities? Do we say Takanta Hida Avud Rabbanan Gabe Yasme, that there's a rabbinic injunction that were done by Yisomim, Liktanim Avud Rabbanan, Ligdolim Lo Avud Rabbanan, that the only time we have to collect from Ziboris is by the Ktanim, because they're not really Gedolim, they need more empathy, more sympathy than anybody else. So when the only child that's left to collect from is a child, okay, so we should be really nice and collect from Ziboris, but perhaps by Gedolim we would not have such a rule, and maybe we would be able to collect from a higher standard, a higher class, a cabin of land. Odilma, or perhaps Mishum Delom Masik Adaita Demalve Demis Love Venafanichse Kami Yasme, because we never would have anticipated that when I took out this shtar chov, that I would only be able to get paid back from the Yisomim, and then be in a case to have a leinoel dela. So I never would have ever thought of this case scenario. Therefore, Hilkach Afilu Gedolim Nami. Okay, stuff happens, people die, and therefore perhaps we should be concerned about noel delas bifnei lovin. But I shouldn't be concerned here, because this guy shouldn't have died underage, and therefore Hilkach Afilu Gedolim Nami, out of the concern that a person can die, everybody dies at some point, so therefore everyone should collect from Ziboris, even a Gadol. So to this, the Gemara says, 4 lines from the bottom, we have a brisa that answers this question. Tashma, Titani Abaye Kshisha, the elder Abaye said, Yisomim She'amru, that when our Mishnah says that when I collect from Yisomim, I have to collect from Ziboris, this is true by Gedolim, Ve'in Tzarech Lomar Ktanim. the din applies across the boards, no matter what the age is of the Yisomim. If they're over bar mitzvah and under bar mitzvah. If I have a shtar chov and I'm collecting from Yisomim, it doesn't matter what their age is. I can only collect properties from them that are ziboris, the lowest class. Perhaps this brisa of Yisomim, where it says Shamru Gadol ve'en tzarach lomar ketanim, perhaps that's only true the inyan shvua, that when we collect something from Yisomim, the Chachamim has a shvua that we say in order to prevent us, to make sure to prevent us from taking advantage of Yisomim, we have to make a shvua. So maybe that's what the brisa means. The gadol b'mili de'avua kekatan dami, that a gadol, if I'm 15, my children are, so my older boys are 17 years old. As it relates to my world of finances, they're complete amaratzim doraisa. They have no idea what is entailed in managing a budget. The credit card is like momish pixie dust of like magic money. Doesn't matter. So clap.
Life and it works.
Yeah, that's amazing. And when it doesn't work, they're like, "What's wrong with your credit card?" I'm like, "You used it too much, and there's no room left on the credit card." So our children don't understand. So the Gemara says that.
That's very.
What, that doesn't happen anymore?
Nobody swipes a card anymore.
Oh, swipe. You're talking actually about the forget the swipe.
No.
The carbon. Yeah. I remember the carbon paper. Yeah, and that they didn't put down 2 sheets, because if they put down 2 sheets, then they could run your card again in your absence. Yeah, for sure. Thank God things have changed.
There was one that you went like this, and then there was one that was like
the press. That's right. So here the Gemara says 2 lines from the bottom, a true story. And this always makes me feel better, because the halacha always views a child who's 13 years and 1 day as a bar chiyuva. And like we all know that their level of maturity is similar to that of an inanimate object. There's no chance that they're functioning in society at that age. And the Gemara here agrees. The gadol b'mili de'avua, a child who may well be a gadol, as it relates to the matters of his father, kikatan dami. I want to just put this on my fridge and just leave it there for my children to figure out what it means. So what does this mean? That perhaps what the Gemara means that when it comes to a shvua, that a gadol and a katan are the same. Even though the gadol is a little bit older, but he didn't understand his father who passed away. He didn't understand his father's matter, so we force him to make a shvua. Perhaps this brisa of Abai Kshisha really isn't the raya we think it is to answer our question as to whether or not the rule of Ziboris applies both to Ktanim and Gedolim. The Hilchasa, what is the din? Turning to the top of Daf Nun Amud Beis, Yesomim Sha'amru Gedolim Ve'in Tzarach Lomar Ktanim Bein l'shvua, bein l'ziboris. That on multiple fronts, we have Ketanim and Gedolim as identical. The Ketanim and Gedolim of a man who passes away, who is now, these kids are now responsible for the estate. And when somebody shows up to these Yisomim with a shtar chov, they have to pay their debts. So the halacha is, it doesn't matter how old the Yasom is. A shvua must be made by the Baal Chov that he's not taking advantage, and the shtar chov, the Baal Chov, can only collect from ziboris. Good. Okay, let's learn a hard sugya. I didn't mean to krach out loud, but it's just a hard sugya. Sorry. All right, the Gemara says that we learn ein nifrei min nechas mishuabadim b'makom sheyesh b'nei chor. Sounds simple. Actually, it doesn't sound simple, but the words do translate simple, that you don't pay someone from nechastim that have a lien on them when there are properties that don't have a lien on them. That should be obvious. I don't want your properties that other people can take back. That's not helpful. I need to be paid back. So when you give me your property that's meshubah to another person, not helpful. Maybe the payros, whatever I benefit in the me, is just not helpful. So the Gemara says that that's the case. And when it says meshubadim b'makom sheyesh b'nei chorin, there really should be the added words, even if it's ziboris. So what would be better for me? Would I rather have a beinonis or an idis to be paid back with a beinonis or an idis that's meshubad, that there's a lien on that property? The government, someone down the block can come say, Phil, it's been nice that you had that for a week, but Ruvain owes me money. I'm taking the property back. So the din is that it's better to pay somebody back busy boris where it's b'nei chorin. And then the Gemara says, okay, I understand. I got the basics. Is that if I am owed money, I would rather you pay me back with property that's b'nei chorin, even if it's ziboris. So says the Gemara, Boy Rav ach devoy bar ami. Second time today. B'matana heach. What would be the difference if I gifted a property to someone? Do we say takanta hu da'avud rabban mishum pseida delekuchos? That when we say that it's appropriate to collect from properties that are b'nei chorin, even if they are ziboris, that was something that was out of concern of pseida delekuchos. Aval matana deleka pseida delekuchos lo. But perhaps by a matana where there's no pseida delekuchos, I dafka should take ziboris. Because what's the concern of pseida delekuchos? We're concerned that by regular pseida delekuchos, that people would rather have beinanis even if it's not b'nei chorin. So here the Gemara says perhaps by matana he should even take the ziboris. Odilma, we're 6 lines down on nonamid beis, or perhaps matana nami ilav de isle hanami ne. If not for the fact that I benefited from giving you a matana, lo yoivle matana, and I would have given it to you. Behilkach keep pseida delekuchos dami. I would therefore specifically want you to take a property that's of a better quality because we're dear friends, and I am concerned of pseida delekuchos. So the Gemara gives a very complex answer. Omar le Mark Shisha Berei de Rav Chizda le Rav Ashi. Tashma, we have a brisa, quarter of the way down, and we'll be stopping at the second to last line of the page. Tashma, Shchiv Meira, there's a man who's on his deathbed. Sha'amar, he said the following thing, and we all know already, we've learned a number of times in this Masechta that the dying wish of a man, you try and fulfill. Tenu, what does the word tenu mean? It's matana. It seems to be a matana. So give. Tenu masayim zuz leploni, v'gimel meos leploni, v'daled meos leploni. Give 200 to person 1, 300 to person 2, and 400 to person 3. So in such a case, when that happens, and then someone shows up to ask for money because they're a bal chov to this person, ein omrim kol hakodim b'shtar zacha. Really, we don't do that. If a person comes to ask for money, he doesn't go to the person of Masayim Zuz first to collect. And then if he has no money, he goes to the person of Shlosh Mil Zuz. And he evenly takes from everybody. So let's say the 3 of you in the room, one of you got 200, one of you got 300, one of you got 400. You've been paid out. But I am a new shtar chov, and I am owed 400 shekel. So I collect evenly from the 3 of you, however you divide 400. Lefichach, yatsa alav shtar chov gova mikulam. Aval, says this brisa, that if the language was slightly different, im amar, tznu masayim zuz leploni, and then the acharav, and afterwards I want you to give new dollars, leploni, and then after that second transaction, a third one, v'tznu v'acharav leploni, v'acharav leploni, and then the third one goes to the third person, omrim, kol hakodim b'shtar zacha. So then, if I come then at that point with a shtar chov, let's say you got 200, you got 300, and you got 400. So then I go down the list. I start with the guy who has 200. That's called a kodem zacha. I start with the person who is first on the list, and if he doesn't have any money, lefichach yatzalav shtar chov gova min ha'acharon. I go to that person. Ein lo gova mishel lefanav. If he doesn't have, I go to the next person. Ein lo gova mishel lifnei fanav. V'afal gab to come a beinonis subasra ziboris, and even though it's the case that the first person might well have collected from beinonis, and the last person collected from ziboris, mi ziboris gavi, mi beinonis lo gavi. This brisa says black on white that we collect from the ziboris. Shma mina, this is a case of tnu, it's a case of matana. What do we see? B'matana nami avu rabbanon takanta. We therefore see that in such a case that the takana applies over here too, that even if there's a matana, the collection that takes place on behalf of that matana is from ziboris. So says the Gemara, that's not true. This brisa is not a raya for matana whatsoever. Why not? Because hacha b'maya skinon bebal chov. This brisa of Shchiv Meira was talking about a case of bal chov. And the Gemara incredulously responds, that's not true. Read the words. V'ha tnu ka'amar. It says give. It doesn't say that if a shtar chov showed up, it just says tnu. It says the Gemara, tnu bechovi. It means to pay back. It doesn't mean what you think it means that it's a matana, even though that's what the words say. Says the Gemara, Velechze shtara deman kadim. Why are we doing this odd system? Let's see who got which person showed up with the shtar first and pay back that way. So the Gemara says that's not how this works. The leka shtara, there was no shtar. The balecho, these 3 people who collected, they didn't have a shtar. the person who is dying said, give them money. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. We know that there were shtaros involved because 2/3 of the way down, the Brisa says that whoever shows up first, whoever got their shtar first, whoever got their money first, they're collected from first. Says the Gemara, that person didn't have a shtar. It was b'shtar pekudata. It was the shtar that had all the rules in it. Namely, it's that which the person who was dying said, but there were no other shtaros. So all of that is approach number 1 to reject this brisa as a raya for the case of matana. And the Gemara says, afilu matana nami. Even had it been that this brisa was talking about matana, it still wouldn't be a problem. V'lo kasha, my gove mina achron. What does it mean that I, who have a document, a shtar chov to collect from you, I collect from the last person? It means a nifsad elame achron, that if I take from person 1, he can then go take from person 2, who could then go take from the achron, and the person who always loses out is the last person on the list. There's another possible answer to all of this, which is deshavu kulhu lehadade, that the 3 people, the one who received 200, the one who received 300, and the one who received 400, they didn't receive different types of properties. They all received benunis, in which case, even if our case was a case of matana, there is no raya because nobody received ziboris in that case. That's pretty simple. I think I had to learn this 10 times to not understand it. It's a very difficult piece of Gemara. Just the subtleties, but just within that one brisa, very, very hard brisa, and it requires a lot of research. 12 lines from the bottom at the 2 dots. Ein motziin la'achilas peiros. We had said, if you look back in our Mishnah for the appropriate context, the Mishnah is on Mem Chesamid Beis, and this was a lengthy piece of the Mishnah that we said that ein motziin from properties that are mishubadim, we don't take out any money, la'achilas peiros, so the shevach karkos, and the mazani shevach banim, all of that whole long list. We don't take out money from the chasim mishuabadim because of tikkun. And that's what the Brisa had said. And looking back at our Gemara, 12 lines or so, 15 lines from the bottom, the Gemara says, "My taima." What's the reason why? Amar ula, amar reish lakish lefisha ein ksuvin, because peiros are not written into contracts like that. If I give you an orchard, let's say a woman brings an orchard into a marriage, she doesn't evaluate what fruits will be produced. We have no idea what fruits will be produced. We have no clue at all. So therefore, you cannot collect from nechasim mishubadim because fruits are really not part of the regular contract. Amar le Rabbi Abba leula, that if that's true, v'hamazon isha v'habanos, when it comes to the food that a husband is obligated to pay his wife and his daughters, we treat it as though it's written, and even though that's true, the ketani ein motziin. Even by the mazon isha banos, even though we treat it like it's written into the contract, the halacha is lemaisa, we don't pay from nechasim mishubadim. So Amar Le, that's not a good raya, because Hasam, in regards to a woman, me'ikara hachi iskun. The whole takana by the woman is that way. Ksuvin hein eitzel b'nei chorin, ve'en ksuvin hein eitzel mishuabadim. It's understood within the world of ksuva that the money that she should get is always from properties that are b'nei chorin and not from properties that are mishuabadim, that have a lien on them. We never want to place this woman in a disadvantage when she's collecting food for herself and for her daughter, and therefore it's assumed in halacha that her payments should always come from properties that are b'nei chorin. And lastly, the Gemara says, "V'chein amar Rav Asi, amar Rav Yochanan, lefisha ein ksuvin." They gave the same exact answer, that the reason why we say peiros are not paid from the chasim mishuabadim, why the peiros of a property are never paid from properties that have liens on them, is because fruits are never included in a contract. So it says the Gemara, Amar le Reb Zera le Reb Asi, v'hamazon ha'isha v'habanos, exact same question from the previous brisa. What about the example that our Mishnah included, which is food that belongs to a woman and her daughters? It's as if they were written down. And if it's as if they were written down, then maybe we should be able to pay them from nechasim mishuabadim, even with properties that have a lien. Yet nevertheless, we say v'ktani ein motzi, and that we're not allowed to pay them from properties that are mishubad. Amar le, meikara hachi iskun. The whole takana by a woman is to protect her in this way. Ksuvin hein eitzel b'nei chorin, ve'en ksuvin hein eitzel mishuabadin. That when it comes to a woman and in regards to her ksuba and all of the payments therein, we always pay her from nechasim that are b'nei chorin and not mishuabadim. And last and certainly not least, Reb Chanina Amar, that it's a little bit different. He's giving you the lumdus as to why payros are not typically included in a shtar, and he writes, Lepisha ein ktuvin. We have no idea how many payros are going to grow, and because we don't know how many payros are going to grow, we therefore can't factor them into the ksuba, into the document, into the contract, and therefore we never pay them out from nechasim mishubadim, but rather only from nechasim that are b'nei chorin. We'll stop right here and pick up on the last line of Nun Amud Beis on Friday morning after the 7:45 Shacharis. I think I'm going to triple check my schedule. I'm pretty sure that works, and we'll stop right there. Wishing you all a beautiful night.